Hello there, Brick Fanatics. The finalists for Series 7 of the BrickLink Designer Program have been revealed. These 5 designs will go to crowdfunding this time next year in order to become official LEGO sets, albeit ones that are limited to a maximum total of 30,000 units each. Whether or not each of these designs sell that full 30,000 units remains to be seen. After all, this time around, Series 7 does not contain one big castle finalist. These castles have become something of a mainstay for the BrickLink Designer Program. They tend to sell out the absolute quickest, sometimes within just a few hours. This time around we do have a medieval finalist. It's not a castle, but it does fit very well with that castle aesthetic. But given that a full quarter to a third of all designs submitted for Series 7 were in some way castle/medieval themed, it is very interesting to see that there are absolutely no castles in this top 5 lineup. I'm aware that that's quite disappointing for some LEGO fans, in particular fans of really big, nice, fancy castles, where at the moment the LEGO Group is not really serving that niche anywhere outside of the BrickLink Designer Program. That said, and I'm aware that this is probably quite a controversial take, I quite like the fact that without a big castle to draw all the attention here, we've got a range of sets that is perhaps more diverse, more weird and wonderful, more bizarre than we've had from any series of the BrickLink Designer Program to date. Is this the best series of the BrickLink Designer Program thus far? Well, that's debatable. Is this the most varied thus far? Absolutely. With one exception, all of these LEGO sets are something that you are not going to get from anything else in the LEGO catalogue right now. We have a bunch of really inventive, clever ideas. And even in the one case where we have something that is very similar to other official LEGO sets, it's a pretty nice build in and of itself. Let's take a little while and run through all of these finalists, talk about all of these designs and how exciting they are for LEGO fans and the kinds of LEGO fans that are going to be picking them up. Now, these were all revealed in a live stream where, as wonderful as it was to hear from a lot of the fan designers behind these, you do get the palpable sense within the comments that people are like, come on, tell us what the next set is, tell us what the next set is, rather than everything being kind of dragged out slowly over the course of an hour and a half. I'm just going to run through these very quickly right now. The 5 finalists are as follows: Walt the Little Robot by Lee1, Alchemist Shop by Shram, Antique Collection by Terorma, Privateer Frigate Fortuna by Brick Perfection, and Sushi Restaurant Sushi by Brick Project. Busting out the Google Translate there to figure out what the characters are at the end of the title for this set. What's particularly interesting about this series of the BrickLink Designer Program is that we have not one but 2 sets that are not at minifigure scale and do not contain minifigures. I mean, alright, the Antique Collection does have minifigures in there, but they're not meant to be minifigures, they're meant to be collectible things. Walt the Little Robot is an interesting choice for the smallest design among all of these because it is the one that is going to be the most accessible for a lot of people. The smallest one usually sells quite well because people can dip their toes in without having to spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds or dollars. The fan vote for BrickLink Designer Program informs the ultimate choices, but it doesn't necessarily determine all of them. It's not a case of the BrickLink Designer Program team taking the top 5 most voted for designs and saying, right, we're going to make those, because they try to average out a piece count and make sure that there is something big on one side of the spectrum and something small on the other side of the spectrum so that people can buy in at every different price point. With the smaller sets, you'll often get something like a snack stand of some variety or a little camping thing, something that's relatively contained and miniature that's not quite as sprawling as some other LEGO sets. And I do get the sense that the BrickLink Designer Program team have a bit of a challenge often trying to decide which of these smaller sets to go for. It's been said in one of the live streams that they've done that they don't feel like there's quite as much competition on the lower end of the scale in terms of piece count, where I think they probably look at a bunch of these designs and they say, oh, well, that one's not quite what we're looking for, that one's not quite what we're looking for. And so they've got relatively few to pick from in order to decide what's going to be that small set. But there needs to be a smaller set, not just to placate the fans that don't want to spend a huge amount of money, but also to offset the piece count of a much larger set like a 4,000 piece set. Walt then is a deviation from the norm because it is not at minifigure scale, it is not a little scene, it is a little brick built figure. And that's really interesting to see the BrickLink Designer Program do because it does mean that they are potentially opening the doors to try out and experiment with different types of designs. Now, the voting numbers are not transparent for any of these designs. We don't know which ones get the most votes, but I would be not necessarily surprised if it were the case that Walt has not had as many votes as some of the other smaller designs. But the heads of the BrickLink Designer Program looked at this and said, that's something that's unique and different, and we want to celebrate something that is unique and different, rather than doing something which is a variation on a thing that we've had in the BrickLink Designer Program in the past. If that is the case, I do think that that is a brilliant idea, because the whole point of the BrickLink Designer Program, as far as I'm concerned, is to allow different niches to be filled that would not otherwise see the light of day in LEGO form. Walt is an attempt and an experiment at something very different, and I am quite excited for that. I'm really interested to see how people react to this one and respond to this one, and how well this one ends up selling, and what people think of it once they've got hold of it. I love the different interchangeable face pieces. I love the really sleek design to this thing. I love the very clean aesthetic. It's almost WALL-E-esque in terms of not WALL-E himself, but in terms of everything on the Axiom, all of the really shiny, nice robots. One thing I think is interesting is during the live stream reveal for all of these sets, one of the hosts asked the fan designer of Walt, Lee-1, how he feels about having the very first space-themed BrickLink Designer Program finalist. And Lee-1 said, "I don't think of this as a space set," which is fair, because it isn't a space set. I don't know how much stock we can actually put in an offhand question from a host during a live stream who didn't seem to have a huge amount of insight into the selection process behind these sets, but it does just highlight the challenge in categorizing some of these sets. Different people have different ideas about what may or may not be a space set, what may or may not be a castle/medieval set, and that is one of the challenges that is facing the BrickLink Designer Program, given that the selection criteria normally only really allows for one set per theme. That's one castle design out of well over 100 that were submitted, and when the line is so blurry between different themes, it's understandable that people can get a bit frustrated when all we've got is a really nice looking Alchemist Shop and no actual castle in this particular series. That categorizing is so important to which finalists get selected for each BrickLink Designer Program series, and yet it's so difficult to know where some of these sets and some of these designs land, because some are a mixture of a bunch of different cool stuff. Anyway, let's talk about the Alchemist Shop by Schramm. Now, this is one that we highlighted in our castle video as being particularly nice. The absolutely brilliant potion bottle in the roof there is the highlight of the set. That's really the eye-catching piece here that makes this one stand out. In terms of design, as mentioned in the live stream, it's quite similar to the blacksmith shop we got a few years ago, and that's brilliant because it's going to work very well as a continuation of that particular style and aesthetic of castle-type sets. This was far from the only Alchemist Shop/Apothecary that was submitted for Series 7. It is one of the ones that I feel garnered the most attention, not necessarily the most attention. I also did quite like the Sleepless Night one. I had a feeling that that one might be in with a chance, but this one, as a slightly more compact package with a slightly cleaner aesthetic, and of course that big giant potion bottle, does I think feel quite eye-catching and quite interesting in its own right. I think the fact that we are getting such similar ideas submitted from a bunch of different people for the BrickLink Designer Program makes it clear the kinds of things that fans want, but it also does make things a little bit muddier, a little bit murkier for those who are trying to vote on all these sets. Because I do feel like a big factor in us not getting a castle in Series 7 is probably just castle fatigue. The fact that there were so many of these that a lot of people were just like, okay, yep, that's a castle, that's also a castle, that's also a castle, and as popular as these castles are, it's difficult to narrow down and say, well, this one is the absolute best of the lot. It was mentioned that for Series 5 of the BrickLink Designer Program, which is coming up for the crowdfunding stage very soon, because a Wolfpack torso had been added to the palette for that particular series, there were a load of different submissions for Wolfpack sets. And because there were so many of them, no one of them stood out to people. They all got a pretty decent number of votes, but there was no one big clear winner. And that particular series doesn't have a traditional castle-themed design. Instead, it's got the Adventure in Transylvania big old Dracula castle. Still a castle, but not a Lego castle. I suspect that something similar has happened here. Because there were so many really nice castle designs, it effectively split the vote. Everybody voted for ones that they liked, but there was no one clear winner because the votes were being spread out over far more castles. I wonder what the fallout from that is going to be in terms of Series 8, and I suspect that we will see far fewer castle submissions where people realise, oh okay, actually making a castle design is far more competitive than I realised, what else can I do? So we might see a far more varied selection of designs for Series 8 as opposed to Series 7. What will also be interesting to see is whether the number of designs goes up or down, because things have tended to kind of rise and fall with the BrickLink Designer Program. The very first series had a huge number of entries, and then there was a dip for a while after that as it built back up, and I wonder if people looking at the very large number of submissions for Series 7 will think, oh, maybe it's not actually worth submitting a design, maybe I've got less chance than I thought, and so the number will drop for a while, and then people will look at it and say, oh well, there was only 200 and something designs, maybe mine could be a winner, and so we'll get more again, or things will just continue to rise up as this program continues to gain popularity. This time around there were apparently 3 million votes over all of these designs, which is a huge number. It's a very big number compared to the number of sets that actually sell, and that is interesting. I again feel like it's maybe time for the BrickLink Designer Program to expand somewhat, but it seems we're going to have to wait a little longer to see what that might look like if that happens. Anyway, the Alchemist Shop is a brilliant design. Well done to Schramm for beating out some very fierce competition there. Next up, let's talk about the Antique Shop by Tiroma. Sometimes I get comments from people saying, why don't you show more of the Lego? Why am I having to look at your face all of this time? And I do understand that. Believe me, I have to edit my face all day, every day. I hate looking at it. But sometimes you've only got 4 pictures of a Lego set or a Lego design to work with, and you need to be very sparing in how you use them. And that is the case here. We've not got a huge number of renders of this design to work with. They all look very, very nice. It's more about, I guess, the devil is in the detail here, because this is a very detailed little build. This is not the biggest design of all of these. This is actually one of the smaller ones. This only has 1,471 elements, but those are very well chosen elements, and you get a level of detail and kind of decadent design here that you don't often see with a Lego set. This is the second of the 2 in this particular series that is not at minifigure scale. There are minifigure elements in here. I wouldn't necessarily call them minifigures though, because they're intended to be things that are on display and they don't have faces. It was mentioned that one thing you can do is swap those out and replace these kind of stock minifigure parts with actual minifigures that you might want to put on display as part of your antique collection. What's more, you could swap out basically anything here and put in all the cool little things that you like. Personally, I know exactly what I would put on display in my antique collection. It is my wonderful collection of the little jewel or gemstone Lego bricks, which I have in almost all the colours. I'm missing 2 as far as I understand it. I'm missing an orange and I'm missing a slightly different light blue, but otherwise I've got all of them. I love these. These are my very favorite element, and I would absolutely just have a row of these on display in my particular Lego antique collection display. There was a time as a kid that I went to pick a brick at Legoland and just filled an entire tub with all of the gems that they had at that particular moment, which were mostly yellow and purple, but I've got so many of them somewhere in a box, and it's wonderful. I just love these. They're so pretty. This was long before you could just get an entire collection of them by buying the Sonic the Hedgehog Lego Ideas set. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Let's talk more about the actual Lego sets that we're here to talk about. The Antique Collection not being at minifigure scale alongside Walt does mean that this is, as said, one of the most varied collections of sets that we've had, and I'm really excited to see what else potentially we could get if we are leaving behind that minifigure scale, or at least moving away from just being solely focused on minifigure scale. I've always had it in my mind, though, that part of the reason why we get so many of these sets which are little scenes featuring minifigures is because that's what fans are voting for the most. Again, I find myself thinking that it would be interesting to see the numbers of all of the votes for all of these designs, and that's not me saying, oh, I can't believe that this one is really one of the most popular, but more just I'd be interested to see if the kinds of sets that people are voting for is shifting as the number of votes increases, as more people are coming to the BrickLink Designer Program, as more people are voting for these designs, as this is reaching a more mainstream Lego fan audience. Is that changing the kinds of designs that are getting the most votes? Because if so, that could have huge ramifications for how this program works going forward. Anyway, now we're up to the 2 big uns, and first up, the one among all of these sets that I feel is probably the most similar to something else that already exists in the Lego catalogue. We have Privateer Frigate Fortuna by Brick Perfection. An absolutely brilliant, beautiful, really detailed ship. This thing is made up of the full 4,000 pieces, the maximum size that a set can be for the BrickLink Designer Program, and it just looks gorgeous. I really love the stern of the ship in particular, this wonderful, gorgeous blue and gold colour scheme with a lot of detail in there. It's just really, really nice. Now there is 1 centimetre in it, but this thing is almost exactly the same length as the Endurance, so that's why I say that this thing is very similar to something else that is in the Lego catalogue already. But these 2 sets are clearly doing something very different, because the Endurance is meant to be very serious and grown up and very, very accurate, and this one has got minifigures in it and so is more at minifigure scale. It feels more like an extension and a fleshing out of the old school pirate theme from years past. Something about just having a minifigure in here gives the whole thing a sense of whimsy that you don't necessarily get with the Endurance. These are two, don't get me wrong, absolutely brilliant sets in their own right. They're just doing things slightly differently with ultimately the same source material, ultimately the same kind of design, and ultimately the same size. Now, this might be called a privateer ship, but we all know what privateer is a euphemism for. This is state-sponsored piracy. This is then the biggest, most detailed LEGO pirate ship that we have ever had, and that is something that is absolutely worth celebrating. It's also got an awful lot of cannons, and that's one thing the Endurance doesn't have going for it. Maybe if they'd had a few more cannons, they could have blasted their way out of the ice a little more successfully, but hey, who knows? Either way, this is a really nice pirate ship, and for those who like a really nice pirate ship and who have space for it, because this thing takes up a lot of space, it is 81 centimeters long, this is going to be an absolutely brilliant addition to any LEGO pirate collection. Finally, we have Sushi Restaurant Sushi by Brick Project. This is not Brick Project's first rodeo. He also designed the gold mine from Series 6. Something worth bearing in mind about Series 7, a new rule has come into place now. Fan designers are only allowed to be chosen as a finalist once every year. So that's once every 3 series of the BrickLink Designer Program. That is to allow more fresh new blood into the designer pool here, to allow more people the chance to get their designs made, and to make sure that we don't just have the same few designers repeated over and over and over. That said, there's a reason why designs from the same few fan designers keep getting chosen. Some people are very good at designing LEGO sets. There are a few different Japanese-inspired designs for this particular series of the BrickLink Designer Program. Honestly, any of them would have been a good pick. I think they're all gorgeous in their own right. This one's particularly nice because it is much like the Art Factory from Series 6, vaguely kinda sorta modular, but not really. It's bending the rules there just enough to be allowed, even though we all know exactly what it's going to be used for. Modulars are not supposed to turn up in the BrickLink Designer Program, but clearly modular designers have found a way to make sure that their designs can be approved even if they are very, very close to being modular in design. This one's also great because it's got a little tram on the side, and again there were quite a few different tram designs submitted for this particular series, so it is interesting to see how this one kind of combines a bunch of ideas that are floating around within the fandom, within our collective consciousness. Another thing I really love about this, as something that is kind of modular and very Japanese in its design, is it means that we do get a different kind of architectural style for a hypothetical modular street. And that's something that I've been banging on about for quite a while now, wanting to have more different architectural influences so that they're not just all kind of slightly vaguely old European buildings. Now we've got something from the Far East instead, and that just is wonderful to have in a modular city lineup because it adds a bit more diversity and a bit more a variation in the types of buildings that we're getting. So all in all, while it is disappointing to see an awful lot of very, very nice designs not make the cut this time around, it is absolutely wonderful to see 5 different designs here that are all so different to each other that it means that we're getting a bunch of things that we haven't necessarily seen in LEGO form before. Which of these are your favourites? Let us know in the comments down below. And while you're there, make sure that you do all of the rest of the YouTube things. Give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe and the notification bell. Now, if you are going to be purchasing any LEGO in the near future and you feel like helping out the channel, make sure that you use the affiliate link down in the description or the QR code that is on screen. They take you straight to the LEGO website. When you use those links, we get a percentage of the sale and we're able to keep the lights on at Brick Fanatics and to keep making videos and other content for the website. Doesn't cost you a penny extra. Do make sure that you also do go to the Brick Fanatics website for way more coverage of all things BrickLink Designer Program and sign up to our newsletter so that you never miss anything LEGO related ever again. Thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful day.